Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, as Nigeria heads into the final stretch before this weekend's elections, many voters struggle to get their hands on voting cards. Also, in Zimbabwe, more people speak up about the abuses at the hands of security forces following their violent response to street protests last month. Amongst the accusations are dozens of allegations of rape. And African solutions to African problems. The African Union's new head, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, calls for the continent to take the lead in resolving problems faced by the bloc as the AU summit wraps up in Ethiopia. But first, Nigeria is gearing up for presidential and legislative elections on Saturday. Current leader Muhammadu Buhari will be facing off against his main rival, former vice president and opposition candidate Atiku Abubakar. With just days to go, thousands of those voters say that they still haven't been able to pick up their voters' cards, known as PVCs. The electoral body in charge of distribution scrambled to extend the collection deadline until Monday. France 24's Anna Cunningham reports from Lagos.
People have been queuing here since 4 in the morning. Many have been trying to pick up their permanent voter cards for weeks. But they've been told they weren't ready, hadn't arrived from Abuja, or simply couldn't be found. Scenes like this have been reported across the country.
Just look at the mammoth crowd. And people have to wait. They have to go through this just to get their PVCs. I already feel disenfranchised. And this is the struggle since on Monday. It's been utter chaos.
The UK, US and EU have already issued statements calling for Nigeria to hold free and fair elections. Both main political parties have already accused each other of preparing for electoral fraud. Collecting voter cards has not given people confidence.
It means that the election is not credible. It's not free and fair. If we're not given the opportunity to express our choice, it means that the election is not free and fair.
2015 was the first time Nigeria saw a smooth transition of power from one party to another. For some, hours spent waiting for their permanent voter cards has paid off. But many remain suspicious that this chaotic system is open to abuse in a country with a history of vote rigging.
Our votes are not for sale. We're Nigerians. Nigeria belongs to all of us, not just some of us. And so this is the time for us to make our point clear, that we are here to make our points clear. And hopefully they will take us serious this time around. And INEC needs to get the system together. The process is so chaotic. And that's where the confusion starts. Whenever you have this kind of chaos, people can get away with a lot of things.
Some 84 million Nigerians have registered to vote, but with days to go now, it remains unclear how many of them will actually be able to carry out their democratic rights.
Well, for those voters who do make it to the electoral booths, they'll have the choice between Abubakar and current President Muhammadu Buhari. Sam Olukoya tells us more about that choice.
So there's much of a difference. If you look at both parties, you see that we've had people shifting back and forth. As somebody said, there isn't much of a difference in terms of ideology, that's even if at all they have any ideology. But in terms of personality, there are quite a degree of differences. Atiku is relatively younger, more energetic. Buhari had been bogged down by ill health. So to that extent, there's a degree of difference. And also in terms of policy, Buhari had emphasized more on corruption, anti-corruption, whereas I can't remember Atiku saying anything about corruption. His emphasis had been on business, improving the economy and privatization.
Now, Buhari won the 2015 elections promising to wipe out Boko Haram insurgents, but insecurity continues to be a problem. How's that likely to affect the race?
Well, the fact that security was one of the main planks of the Buhari campaign in 2015, and if we look back a little over about 4 years back, a little less than 4 years back, definitely he had not been able to achieve that. And a number of people have been displaced, a number of people have been killed in the last 3 years or more since Buhari came in. I was in central Nigeria recently and I met people who have been displaced, who said they will never, never vote for Buhari because he never helped them. I mean, so much of killings have happened, and the Buhari government never showed any interest in protecting them. Similarly, so many people will not be able to vote because they've been displaced as a result of the crisis in the northeastern Nigeria, that's the Boko Haram crisis, and also people in central Nigeria, where we have a problem between herders and farmers. So it's a two-edged situation where a number of people, thousands of people, will not be able to vote. And then those who might be able to vote in these areas where there is insecurity, many of them are not likely to vote for Buhari because they felt his government has not offered them the required protection.
Sam Olukoya there for us in Abuja. Now, the African Union summit wrapped up on Monday night. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi officially took over, heading the bloc during the meeting. Now, he's underscored the need for African solutions to African problems. Our Mark Perelman headed over to the Ethiopian capital. He tells us more about the meeting.
Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is now formally the head of the African Union for the year to come. He took the baton from Rwanda's President Paul Kagame, and he really insisted on showing that he wanted to be the real boss. He came with a huge delegation. He insisted to be front and center in the photograph with his fellow heads of state and government, and he delivered a speech in which he stressed the importance of security, of the fight against terrorism. He vowed to pursue the economic reforms engaged by Kagame, essentially a free trade agreement for the whole continent. We're nearly there, according to AU officials. The other initiative is to create a tax on imports coming from outside Africa, 0.2%, to boost the finances of this organization, the African Union. So clearly a change of personality, a change of tone. The first litmus test for Abdel Fattah al-Sisi will be Libya. There were big discussions, contentious ones here in Addis Ababa. The African Union wants to be more involved. It really asked the UN to have a seat at the table to make sure there is finally a roadmap that will bring an end to this crisis. This will be closely watched by Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Egypt, of course, is a major player in the crisis in Libya.
Mark Perelman there for us in Addis Ababa. Now, in Zimbabwe, more people are speaking up about alleged abuses at the hands of security forces. This following their violent response to street protests in mid-January. About 17 people were killed, around 1,500 were arrested. Amongst the accusations of widespread violence are dozens of women who say that they were raped. Our correspondents tell us more.
Many of the women who say they were raped by uniformed men last month are still in hiding. Their safe houses are being hunted by police, but despite the risks, alleged victims are coming forward to tell their stories.
On the 15th of January, there were 5 of them. They had black masks on. We couldn't see their faces, only their eyes. They were in army uniforms. One of them raped me without using any protection.
They came into my house on January 18th. They told me they were looking for members of the opposition, those that were hurling stones in the streets. They asked me where my boyfriend was. They wanted to rape my 13-year-old daughter, but I pleaded with them to take me instead. They held a knife to my daughter's throat. There were 3 men in uniform, 1 policeman, and another in civilian clothes, masked.
The day we met this young mother, she tested positive for HIV. Doctors have advised her not to breastfeed. These women still live in fear after a brutal crackdown on street protests in January. Security forces face a growing list of alleged abuses. Claims include murder, rape, beatings, torture and abductions.
I think what we are actually seeing in terms of the nature of the violations and the pattern, it's more like instilling terror in the communities, such that even now, the aftermath, if you go to those communities which were affected, the moment people see army officers in uniform, they are terrified.
The government's blamed the violence on rogue elements and says it can only deal with rape charges that have been officially reported.
Punishment will come to the perpetrators of violence, perpetrators of rape, perpetrators of looting, and all those crimes.
This crackdown has tarnished the image of President Mnangagwa. His response towards the military's brutality suggests that he continues to rely heavily on the army that put him in power.
And finally, South Africa's SOWETO gospel choir hit the right note at the Grammys in Los Angeles on Sunday. The group won the Best World Musical Album at the award ceremony in its third win and fifth nomination in the category. The winning album's called Freedom and was recorded last year in tribute to the 100 years of Mandela celebrations. Those marked what would have been the late South African President Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday. So we'll be leaving you with the sounds of Soweto. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.
She